Mic's working? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah? All right. So, tonight we're going to talk about selling design systems. How many are designers here? Decent amount, right? That's good. So right now, design systems are all the rage, right? We see them everywhere, as they should be. They've really helped us in many different ways sort of speed up and do things a little more efficiently than we used to do. And there are many, many talented people who are talking about this. Gina Bolton, Alex Scheffler, Charlotte Jackson, Dave Cronin, all these people who are sharing wonderful ways that they have developed and built these design systems at small and large companies alike. Some of those companies are Salesforce, GE, WeWork, Airbnb. I mean, if you go on Medium and just search design systems, you're going to have no shortage of information on how to structure and build a design system. Sorry to say if that's what you came for, this is not one of those talks. They do a good job of that. So what we instead are going to talk about is a conversation of how we sold and gained adoption of an internal design system at EA called Joystick. Like Lainey mentioned before, we work inside the IT organization. So what we end up supporting is a lot of the in-house stuff, applications, sites, these types of things. And before I get into that, I want to sort of share a little story. So fortunately, a few years ago, I lived in Europe. We lived in Switzerland for a few years. And while living there, we maintained a very American trait of driving everywhere we went. We had friends that, flew everywhere they went, and we were always in the car. And we liked taking these journeys to Munich and to Paris and Italy and whatnot, just being in the car and enjoying these countrysides, these landscapes that we weren't necessarily familiar with here in the US. And on one of these trips, we were driving to Munich, which is a fantastic city. If you've never been there, highly, highly recommend it. And as we were driving through the countryside, I was noticing something in the distance, something that I had never seen before. It was a group of birds acting in a way that I had not recognized. It was an amazing sight where these birds were dancing. I don't know if you've ever seen a flocking behavior like this, but they were dancing through the sky in a particular pattern. In fact, this pattern is called murmuration. Murmuration is essentially a collective animal behavior where they flock and operate as a system in ways that no one individual bird could do. They mostly do this for foraging, for protecting themselves from birds of prey. But if you look at it, it's just this amazing dance. And so here I am driving, and I'm kind of distracted and occasionally making sure I'm between the lines. But witnessing these thousands of birds operating in a way where they have an integrity system as a group that actually doesn't hurt or impair the integrity system of the individual birds. They actually don't touch wings. There's no lead bird. There's no one bird that's defining the direction of where they go. As a group, they do this inherently. So I'm going to stop the story there. We'll pick it up in a little bit. As mentioned, I work at EA. EA does have a large office here in Austin, for those of you who don't know. And at EA, we make all sorts of rad stuff, which I do nothing with. We make these amazing games, and we do none of it. So we're not part of it. We work in IT, which is pretty evil. And in fact, I don't know if you've noticed, I've changed the font because we really have trouble with fonts in IT. So I had to switch it back. Our main areas of focus inside of IT are really customer experience and employee experience. We do operate in other ways, but these are our two big focus areas. And if you look at both of those, we're really focusing on what we call perceived value of either customer interactions with EA or employee interactions while working at EA. So very similar stuff, just internal and external. And So that's just a little bit of background on what we do. So why a design system? Why is that needed inside of our function? So EA, I'm going to share a little bit more about the company. So EA is a very decentralized matrixed organization. We have, I think, 44 different offices. We have designers that are essentially in each one of these offices, often teams of one, that work across the entire portfolio who never sort of have a central role or work across the portfolio, except for two organizations. There's one in our marketing team, and they really do sort of that upfront marketing website stuff. They have their own design system. And then us in IT, where we work internally across all these organizations. And what ends up happening, why a design system is really needed, is if you start just focus on the employee experience itself. So a job application goes out, a job description goes out, and there are teams all across EA who spend a lot of time sourcing out candidates. This is a timely and expensive process. There's a variety of teams involved to eventually hire Mary. So Mary comes in, and she's the perfect candidate who has the absolute right profile. She has the inherent expertise to resolve the problems that are needed to be resolved. But when Mary arrives, she then has to deal with 10s, 20s, maybe even more different systems across her work. So these are the spaces that we really start to dig into. Resource management, workforce management, employee management. Those are all different systems that are either purchased as vendor software, as built in-house, and they are all operated by separate teams, all who think they are mostly right on what they're doing. And they are, right? So it's a world of systems that Mary has just joined, and what ends up happening is Mary sits in the middle of this. And as an individual user, she has to deal with all of this accidental complexity, this really heavy cognitive load of learning and understanding all of these systems and products and processes. It's a nightmare for Mary. So what our focus is, whether it's on customer experience or employee experience, is looking at the entire experience end to end and seeing how we can reduce that load, how we can speed up her process, any of that kind of stuff. So if you think about it, all these different areas of focus, all these different products and services that we end up building. Sorry, I can't show you any of it. It's all internal. But we have huge challenges with scale, reusability, and attempting to do any type of craft. So let's just talk about Joystick briefly. So what really is it? It's an internal system, and it's a collection of resources for individuals, teams at EA to either design or develop or write applications, websites, fairly standard, right? What it actually is for developers, it's SaaS. So it's just a front-end system that is kind of stack agnostic. And then for designers, it's Photoshop and Sketch. And what we do is maintain parity between them. So anytime there's a release, we always make sure there's parity between what is in SaaS, what is in Sketch, what is in Photoshop. That enables us to roll out and make these products that even if they're in separate departments, separate teams, they at least feel like they're coming from the same family. And whether it's dashboards or websites, they just kind of feel like they're part of the same family. That's our goal, right? So the talk tonight is about selling design systems, really before asking for buy-in. And when we went out and started to think about doing this, what we really ended up asking ourselves was, what needs buying? So I like this quote from Jared Spool. I've been pitching our services for 23 years and never once have successfully convinced an executive of anything. We work in IT. We were talking about this earlier. There is no job family of design in IT. My official job title is Director of IT. So trying to explain what a design system might do for an IT organization is really, really difficult. But we still had to get to work. We still had to do stuff. And so when we thought of what needs buying, what we were really looking at is what needs buying by those who use our products. So leading with empathy to understand how they might leverage them and utilize them in their everyday, but also going up, understanding the people who would end up buying the services of design. That's really moving up, talking about our leadership teams. So when we started, I'm going to point to Andy, so it was just Andy and I who started out on this little journey. We leveraged maybe a familiar framework that you've seen before from Strategizer called the Value Proposition Canvas, and we looked at both sides of, say, the users and the buyers of our services, of leadership. And what we came to the conclusion on, and you maybe see lots of tweets around this, is adoption is not funding. I see a lot of, it's great that startups and these types of things celebrate getting money, but that is not what's going to translate to the adoption or success of your tool. At the heart of it, design systems are only tools. They help us improve our efficiency and our efficacy throughout our everyday. They're just a tool. If you think about projects, projects are planned activities with designed constraints around them. And with projects and funding, that brings big words like this out. Governance, committees, ownership. It's amazing how money suddenly becomes like a control issue. And those who give money want the control, right? So, funding also, if you don't bring data to the table to get that funding, you really leave yourself open to subjective feedback on what is good or what is success. And as designers, that's a very precarious situation for us to be in, right? Then you have 12 different chefs all telling you to go in different directions, and that becomes really difficult. So what we really came to the conclusion of when we evaluated what needs buying is looking at these two things. Design systems should deliver value and live. They should evolve. They should continue to provide value. Projects should deliver and die. So at our company, it's how quickly can you get a project done so we stop having to pay for it. So we actually looked at ourselves and said, should we fund this through a project? Is that how we should approach that? It seems like a dangerous situation. What we instead said was success is adoption. So adoption is not funding, that really success is measured by adoption. So I want to talk briefly about where I sort of get this thought in my mind, where it's come to me. So a few years ago, there was a paper by Don Norman and Roberto Vergante, where they talked about incremental and radical innovation. This is a word we hear a lot. Be more innovative and go faster. These types of blank, words that have no meaning. But what they went through, and they were looking at the balance or the difference between incremental and radical innovation, sort of defining what those were, but then creating 3 criteria for what makes innovation successful. And in their paper, what they came to the conclusion of is that any innovation, in order to be successful, has to have these 3 things. It has to be novel, has to be unique, and it has to be adopted. Guess where innovation typically fails? Adoption, right? How many things do we put out there and users don't use it for whatever reason? So this was really kind of the basis of our approach. And that helped us develop some assumptions and hypotheses of how we were going to go about and do this. First, our assumptions. We knew that we had to support multiple platforms and devices. Again, EA being this decentralized matrix company, everybody gets to choose what kind of computer they're on, how they want to work. Even as a big company, we're not very mobile friendly right now, but we knew that we wanted to be there. We knew that we were going to be partnering with dozens of teams, engineering, product, all across the company. So we had to be able to support them. We always knew as well from the get-go that we were going to be a relatively small team. Leah Booley put out a paper a few years ago when she was with Gartner where she was talking about ratios. And you know, the optimal designer to engineer ratio is like 1 to 6 if you want to be world class. When I joined IT, it was 1 to 500. We're up to 6 on the team now, so it's a little better, but still not great ratios, right? We also knew that we were going to be supporting a lot of teams when doing this, and their ability to also ship and get out products. Being a small team, we knew we couldn't build from scratch. That would just take way too long. And we had to consider culture. So culture is a very big, important piece of this scenario. As previously said, I've worked at companies like Apple, and Apple is basically like, this is what you do. And at EA, it's like, no, 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 I didn't hear what you said. I'm going to do what I want. So we had to take that into consideration when we were coming up with this approach. From those assumptions, we came up with 3 hypotheses of how we were going to actually deliver this. First, getting upfront buy-in, money, would be incredibly difficult, so we're not going to do it. We're just going to focus on giving stuff to people and see what happens. We also noticed that from our research that designers, developers, engineers are more likely to use something if they have choice in using it. You tell them they have to do it at EA, they're going to be like my 5-year-old, and they run away and do the exact opposite, right? And most importantly, we needed one. We needed to build one, so why not just build something that everybody else could use as well? So getting back to those birds, right? So I'm going to read a little bit. Sorry. So remember the murmuration. This is this collective animal behavior. Mentioning that the goals of the group are different than the goals of the individual, yet somehow they're both able to work in comparison. So when I was at Nestlé, I worked inside of a scientific institute. My title was actually scientist. And they gave me 20% of my time to just do research. Imagine that. Not research to make products, but just like go out and do research. Maybe you'll get a patent one day. Very strange. But in that research, I came across a framework out of Stanford called collective impact. I happen to believe wholeheartedly that leveraging or looking at other frameworks from other genres of work are really important. Architecture, education, social change, all these types of things are really important. And collective feedback was a particular area. It's a framework all around large-scale social change. And where they started innovating around was large-scale education change. And what that framework basically set forward was, if everybody doesn't work against a common agenda, it will fail. If one party decides to go out and, one bird decides to go out and do their own thing, the whole thing falls apart. So I thought, rad, that's cool. I work at a video game company, I got to put a video game slide in, right? Sign me up. I'll just use this framework. But then getting into the thick of it, doing a little more research, guess where they struggled a lot? Money. Funders. When they started rolling out this thing, they had a lot of problems of getting people to donate lots of money. If you're talking about global or large-scale social change, it's a lot of money, who didn't want control of what happened with that money. So there was a reluctance to pay for infrastructure. We talk about it a lot at the government level. Bridges and roads, design systems, by and large, is infrastructure. Funders love short-term solutions. Give me my money, let me ship, see what a big deal I am, right, kind of thing. And there was also this important piece that there was a reluctance to give up decision-making. And then it becomes something else. It's not really a communal type approach, right? What they came up with were criteria in order to make sustained success with this framework. What they actually came up was there has to be a team that just takes up responsibility in assembling the elements of a solution. They just take it up. They just do it. What they're looking to do is create a movement for change, that looking at outside sectors for influence and impact on how they might approach it, using actionable knowledge to influence behavior. So again, this is like data before you present. And then cross-sector coordination. And so this is working outside of your own group, stepping away from your desk, going out and seeing what everyone else is leveraging, using to get that scalable success. So we did that. Andy and I, at the time, it was just the two of us. We went out and watched people work, from developers to our senior leadership. We just watched what they were doing. And in fact, what we saw was what you would think you would see. You see developers loving all these frameworks that nobody told them to do, nobody told them to use, frameworks that gave them the ability to fork, to modify, to contribute back, all those types of things. Great. But we also observed that their major pain was time. That really, when looking at this, they spent a lot of time looking at frameworks that had difficult or incomplete documentation, frameworks that had different pricing or various learning curves. And then they are not designers. So they ended up spending way too much time thinking about fonts, colors. And so we knew that time was, for developers, going to be a particular pain point to resolve. What we ended up seeing is, this was the sentence that came to us a lot. Can you make your thing look like my thing? Or my thing look like your thing? Through all that, we said, going back to our assumptions, and we looked at existing models out there, and we said, basically, what we saw coming out of Salesforce with the Lightning design system, out of GE with their Predicts design system, was here a developer kind of mode. They structured their system quite well that would work with our culture. And then Predicts did a lot of the cultural, like, let's do it underground stuff and tell it. So we were lucky enough to hear the stories that they shared and sort of said that mix might work for us. So we just started working. We said, if we build it, they'll come. We'll see what happens. Through all these conversations, we ended up hearing a lot of feedback where I, many days, get an email that says, hey, we've got something shipping tomorrow. Can you help us out? Right? And so instead of yelling at them and telling them that, hey, you could have talked to us 4 months ago, jerk, right? We'd say, what's taking up your time? Use that as an opportunity to just ask them about what their previous process was. We knew we couldn't help them in that moment, but maybe the next moment. And are you struggling? What are you struggling with the most, right? And are there any frameworks you use it? This was perhaps the craziest quote I saw. I spent the last week trying to make the best button. I looked all over Google. Best button. There's a lot of subjective feedback in Stack Overflow for best button. But eventually, they had to ship. So they just picked Bootstrap, and whatever the Bootstrap button was, that's what they shipped with. I mentioned again, hey, we're launching this thing tomorrow. Can you just validate that I've talked to you? Check. Right? And I didn't have time to incorporate that PDF style guide that was given to me with all those red lines. I'm responsible for that. I have to ship. I can't do it. So again, if we go back to what we observed, that's not the things that they were adopting. They were adopting these open frameworks that had good documentation, that allowed them to move quickly, not have to think about these choices that they didn't really want to think about. And again, move us away from the model of red lines. Here's all the margin paddings. Developers, it doesn't really excite them. JavaScript, Angular, breaking between the front and the back, that excites them. This doesn't excite them. To a model where we decided to provide really well-documented information with tools like NPM, Grunt, you name it. Build it out there. And at the same time, as I mentioned, giving designers these Photoshop and Sketch frameworks that just maintain that parity. What we also did is they said there's a large part of the marketing piece. If you look at those open frameworks, what do they do really well? They market their frameworks really well. And if we looked at other design systems inside of EA, which there in fact are, more for the consumer-facing side, if you ask them for documentation, you would probably get an email with 12 different links and maybe a PowerPoint. It's not really great. So we decided to give them guidelines where they could learn how to structure this. And maybe even a little mini tool that says, what do you want to do to essentially spit out a package for them? Here's your zip file with everything you need to go do what you need to do. And how did we find early adopters? We used this handy chart that said, do they need help and do they know they need help? Probably the why is the more important thing. That gave us a sweet spot. So if they didn't think they needed help, we said, fine, you're good. Moved on to the people who were really crying out. So the lessons learned in a lot of this, when we delivered it, is when we finally told leadership that we had done this, we used real data. We already had 6 different teams across EA using it, and on average, during a project, they were already saving 3 weeks of work. I also said, when I told leadership, but I can turn it off if you want me to. They didn't. When it came to developers, nobody puts baby in a corner. If you are telling them that they have to adopt a certain thing at EA, it is Wile E. Coyote running off into the dust. Just wouldn't work. We also did a hackathon. So I invited everybody to Austin. I said, I will buy you food. I'll give you a t-shirt. If you spend 2 days in Austin of providing a solution for a real EA problem using joystick. Those are the criteria. So they worked. Within 8 hours, we had fully functioning Angular prototypes that were talking about simple things, all working. So this was part of also the delivery to leadership. Yeah, this took 8 hours, right? Talking about marketing PR and those shirts. I gave out, I think, 60 different t-shirts to people at maybe 10 different offices, and I only asked them to wear them to the office. That was it. And if anybody asked what joystick design system was, to just tell them the URL. That was it. It was like the college campus, sign up for a visa, you get a t-shirt kind of approach. And it ended up working quite nicely for us. But we also, on our homepage, developed a 90-second video where I did my snowball microphone. Hey, have you worked here? And made it very marketing product-y. And that, again, was a very big difference maker. We could send them to a URL where within 90 seconds they knew what it was, had all this documentation and guidelines around it, and they just started using it. So much so that we didn't actually know who were using it. We forgot to put like an analytics tracker in at the beginning. Most importantly, though, is we don't still have funding for it. We never asked for like an invest project where we need direct money in here. Kind of a win-loss kind of thing. I'd love that we had just budget going towards that, but in IT, budgets are on an annual basis, and after your budget is done, that usually means no more money is going to come to you. Once you ship, it's done, it's out. So what we end up doing is evolving the design system through other funded projects. When they need new components, when they need new assets, they ask us, and we end up building it for them so that they can put it right back into the project. That ends up making sure that the design system is in a variety of solutions kind of going across, but we still evolve the system and maintain that current, updated mood. Dedicated resources. So there's a lot of talk now about design ops. That was the first choice I made. Hire a person to just do this. So we have a dedicated resource. It's one who full-time updates and maintains everything, but also provides all the support. So we have a Slack channel just dedicated to the design system. People are in there all day, asking questions, getting feedback, learning, evolving. Design systems are tools, as I mentioned again. We still need design. This design system hasn't actually helped us or fixed the problem of how design is misunderstood. I think these days most people kind of get the term UX. Design is still this hairy creature, right? This comes from Ellen Lupton at the Smithsonian. People misunderstand what design is, and because we have a design system, it either allows people to invite us in because we help them, that they want us to give them more help, or that the design system is designed. Thank you very much, we're not talking to you anymore. So through all this, another favorite quote of mine is coming from Dan Hill. Has anybody read this book? Dark Matter and Trojan Horses. So, working in big companies, there's lots of what you might say are politics. You have to find ways of speaking other languages, all these other things. This particular book is a tiny little book which really talks about very interesting things to do around that. Essentially what Dan talks about is having mini Trojan horses. So like wheeling these things into a project and then standing back and kind of going like, oh, did that happen? I didn't know that happened, right? And they adopt it without, So it's a strategic design is what he's saying is you apply it to everything you do. Not just to the tangible product making, but when you're looking at organizational design or delivery models or any of these types of things, you can use design approaches to attack those. So some results that we've gotten so far. How are we doing? We now have over 20 teams using it that we know of. Might be a little more than that. And they're not just devs. So there are product managers using it, designers using it. We have keynote presentations, PowerPoint presentations. We have color swatches. So there's a whole variety of ways that people are leveraging this, which is pretty great. There's 15 plus projects that we know about that are leveraging it as well, which is pretty rad. It's been live for just over a year. And what's been fascinating, absolutely brilliant, is we've had a lot of contributions from other teams. Other excited engineers, developers, and designers. Somebody made .NET helpers for this thing. I would have never imagined that we're still using .NET in our applications, but somebody made .NET helpers. That's brilliant, right? As I mentioned before, many teams still think design is joystick, joystick is design. Thank you very much. It's okay. Can't get everybody. And lastly, what we have are we ask the community to write their own use case, write their own story about how they leveraged it. We then publish it on our site so that they get the credit for how they've adopted it. People can reach out to our customers about how they've done it. And that really excites them. That gets a lot of other people motivated. Again, we work in IT, and with that comes kind of the moniker that, oh, you're IT. You probably have a secret agenda to make us not be able to do anything, right? So it's going okay. None of this happens without a very talented team. And my job is to kind of just keep the distractions away. But this team has been amazing. I'm particularly sad this week because 2 of the team are actually leaving. They're going on to very great things. They have amazing opportunities, and I'm super stoked for them that they are heading out. And in particular, Andy has been there from the beginning. Andy's here from Switzerland, so he worked with me at Nestlé, and he's just given his notice on Monday, so thanks a lot. But none of this happens without them, and they are brilliant, and they've done so much to get us this far, and it will continue. But they are the heart of this, right? And lastly, what we've done is tried to introduce a little humanity in IT. So what we've said is that this system is made for the humans at EA by the humans in IT, because I think largely, they think we're robots, right? I think that we're we're not really there to help them, we're there to block them. And so we're trying to introduce a little bit of humanity, not only to our customers, but really to the IT organization, show them different ways of working. So that's it. Thanks. I do want to take a moment to thank Doug and Lainey. I know it's been a rough couple weeks. And look at the enthusiasm of the community that you all here have tonight. And we all have your back, and we're here for you. I don't know if that makes it better, but the community of Austin is pretty brilliant. And so we're thinking of you all very much. So thank you very much. Yeah. This is the fun stuff. Now I can go off script.
You're going to make your deck available to others.
I will. Yeah. So I'll make it available. We are looking to open source. So we kind of had to, this model is where we've made it open source to be open source, but we have to get through some legal hurdles. There is an actual legal department of open source at EA that we're working with to get it there, and that's Andy's last job, is to kind of get us to a point where we can put the system out too. It's only fair, right, that other people share back out, and we don't know if it helps anybody, but not only the deck, but also joystick too. I don't have any more T-shirts. I'm sorry. Questions? Yeah.
So an assumption, I guess, you can tell me my assumption's wrong first off, but you were brought into this IT group
Yep.
to do this. So my assumption
I actually was not brought in to do this. I made a choice to do
It blows my
this.
mind that someone brought in somebody to improve
Nope.
the design of internal systems.
I think they brought me in because they maybe had liked what I did, but didn't fully understand what
Perfect.
maybe I would push them to do,
Yeah.
which isn't easy. So this is my second time at EA. So I had worked there a few years ago, and we had done some fun stuff a couple of years ago, and I think they, when I moved away about a year after me moving, we have a Geneva office in Switzerland, and so the CIO happened to be there, went out to dinner, and that was the conversation that started me coming back. But it was more like he had seen results with design, but not necessarily knew what that meant.
So with that, then you had two users your team's trying to improve the life of. One is the new hires going through all these IT systems.
Yep,
The other are the developers developing all these IT systems.
yep.
With your data-driven approach, it seems like you've targeted primarily the efficiency gains of the developers going through these systems. Have you also targeted anything with
So
users?
that's where it goes through project work. So there's an entire program around employee experience
Okay.
that do have metrics of, say, what customer experience have around time on task and NPS, and instead of CSAT, ESAT, all these types of metrics, all driven through objectives. And so we've actually had to introduce how to develop those metrics as well. It's a brand new program portfolio that has not existed. And then what we do is we just use joystick as the back end of that. So it's a way for us to then say, here's another big program that was driven through this. But the metrics aren't the same. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, sir.
Sure. Other questions? Yeah.
You said you had one full-time employee
Yeah.
on the project. How did you manage to get that funded?
So I had tremendous support from a boss, which, again, frankly, that cover is kind of needed. I have a habit of, when a constraint isn't explicitly said, to believe that it's not a real constraint. And so, to me, everything is an experiment. And so part of this idea of bringing Andy on, so we first brought him on as a contractor, is my boss said, you need somebody else on the team. I said, I'm going to pick whoever for whatever role. I went and picked Andy. And it was early enough in my days there where I could sort of say, well, you know, I'm still learning, still trying to get used to the place, where there wasn't a lot of pressure to ship. I couldn't do this in like year 3. So when we finally told them about it, I was half expecting them to go like, what the hell did you do? Like, why are you doing that? Because if, like, say I had done this at Apple, they might have like escorted me out the door, you know. But here, the interesting thing that happened was everybody in the room, CIO leadership, and everybody was like, finally somebody's done that. We've needed that forever. But they didn't know to ask for it. And so that experiment worked. Now, I've also played with that same idea and do other experiments. How far can I take that concept? I wouldn't recommend that approach at a lot of companies. It works at EA. So yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, did you build this from nothing? I mean, was there
No.
any-
So we started with Lightning as, so Andy spent a lot of time looking at multiple frameworks, sort of seeing how they broke everything down, how they were structured. And so we started from Lightning and then sort of side by side started building our own. So when we first, you know, the 0.01 release was only a couple tiny components. It wasn't big. It wasn't until we had about 4 months of work that then we had the hackathon and said, let's start using it. It still wasn't very big, just basic components, forms and labels. So we didn't start from scratch and just said, we're brilliant. You know, we read a Brad Frost blog and now everything is Legos, right? So we started, Andy spent a lot of time looking at these different markups, looking at how they broke it down to then say this is the path that we're going to take and start building it out from there. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So you were saying that you had previously worked at Apple
Yeah.
for a bit. I was wondering, have you seen this design system type of thinking apply to physical products that are not necessarily all digital?
So I didn't work with physical product at Apple, but I did at Nestlé. And yes, very much so. If you think about lean manufacturing, all that process, that comes out of industrial design, right? So make blocks of components, fit them together. Cars, that's how they're made. These days they're doing a lot of 3D printing, cheap prototyping, but everything is how to reuse these components in multiple things. So if you look at like the chassis of cars, it's all right. The CR-V and the Civic are the same chassis. So, I think they've been there forever. In architecture, in industrial design, they've been doing this for a long time. Digital is just kind of catching up. There's a lot of technology that had to catch up. We've had style guides and these other frameworks for a long time, but there wasn't this kind of quick, rapid way to build front end. 10 years ago when I was at Apple, there weren't, jQuery wasn't even out yet. So there was just the beginning of sort of these modular parts and thinking along those lines. Yeah. Other questions? You can ask me anything. This is actually more fun than giving a talk.
What about WiseSketch and Photoshop? Seems like extra.
Because we have
time.
60% of our users are on PCs.
Alright. Well, because you're a nice guy.
Because we're nice guys.
So you mentioned that you had done without explicit funding for other projects.
Yeah.
Were you able to like maintain the momentum of like incrementally building it out when other projects would spike, or did you kind of have to sometimes put it on hold? Or how did you deal with that, like keeping it going? I'm working on something really similar.
Right.
It's like X amount of work streams going on, and we're building
Right.
this under like behind the scenes. But when things spike and we're operating when we have to stop, did you find a way
So
to keep it going?
you keep it going because Andy doesn't work on project work.
Okay.
Andy works on joystick
Okay.
for another month, and then he's leaving. So that we had to do, because whatever happens is projects are funded, put all resources to that, and it gets dropped off. So we had actually done this at Nestlé, tried to do it, and that's how it happens. So lesson learned. That's not going to work that way. So without kind of that dedicated resources, he's been here for 2.5 years, something like that, and leading a lot of that. And it is DevOps. He does all the support. So when there are bugs, he's the one triaging them. There's an advantage, I think, in a couple ways. I think my ideal state would be if we had a defined tech stack across, because then you can build full widgets. I mean, if you look at material, right, and frameworks like that, you can build these full stack things that include all sorts of motion and other things. But that's not how EA works. So we've got people in Polymer and Angular and Material and PHP and ASP, and they all like sit cubes away from each other. And they don't want everybody else's thing. They want their own thing. So that's where we went with just this SaaS BEM type model. So it works for us. Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't here earlier if I missed it, but did the design system have specific pillars that you were working against when you were developing it, or did you just have high-level objectives of which one it is?
So we didn't even set it up as a project. Like it was just like an ongoing experiment. And whatever the people who were in that sweet spot of like knowing they need help, we'd sort of make what they needed. But fundamentally, it was just basics, forms and tables, and eventually, I think the first non-basic thing was a slider. But there were no, the pillars or anything. There were no principles or anything like that. It was just those assumptions and hypotheses, and just saying, as long as it doesn't break one of those, let's see what happens. Even still to this day, it's kind of the same thing. So, again, in an ideal state, I think you would have that. For us at EA, it wasn't the right approach. Yes?
So making a design system available to developers, do you feel that there's risk involved with them using the design system and feeling like they've checked the box on design without
Absolutely.
going through the full UX work?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm very pragmatic. When design doesn't exist in an entire organization, has never existed, I can't win over everyone. But if they happen to have, stuff that looks like other stuff, that is a step in the right direction. And fundamentally, a lot of these teams are building tools for like users of audiences of 10. They don't need me. I mean, could I sit there and could we do full UX research and all that? Yeah, but if you're talking about 10 users of a system, I have to be pragmatic and say that's right. That's design system's good enough. And eventually, it does come to me of how much of a pain this tool is. I'm kind of like, well, okay, what kind of impact does that have on our company? It's okay. But there are definitely teams who are just like, good enough. But guess what? They were doing that before we had a design system. Check with Ryan literally became a checkbox when I first arrived. The CIO, who I work with very closely, passionate about design, he's not made anything. So he's just like, check with Ryan before you launch. So literally an email before the launch day would be like, Jason told me you have to do this. Will you say that you saw it? Right? So it was happening anyway. So what we're looking is the long game. How can we slowly get people to adapt to different things?
Does Joystick also include guidelines for when EA purchases an out-of-the-box solution, like say CRM from Salesforce?
Yeah. So we have like a design kit to say, Tableau.
Okay.
There's only so many things you can do. Hex colors and maybe a logo. So use these hex colors. So we prepackage these kind of just kits and guidelines for that too. That's a lot of our work is these prepackaged goods. But those are usually much smaller teams. So yeah, we do that too. I mean, it's pretty incredible how much we've done with a relatively tiny team. It's worked for us.
Once you put the system out there and anyone can use it, it's a little bit out of your control.
Yeah.
How do you help with people misusing like colors and typography and just even designers?
Right? So a lot of that is branding decisions. My team doesn't own brand. So I don't have to chase that down. Luckily, right? I kind of have a take that if nobody at a high enough level gets really upset that that's happening, then it maybe just doesn't matter. Fundamentally, from a designer, it creeps me out, and I want to change it. But if they're not mad, me getting mad is going to look really weird.
Have any of the teams requested that kind of guidance?
Lots of teams request that guidance, and I hold the line that here's the team over there. And in fact, I put a lot of pressure on them to provide me actionable feedback that I can use to create themes. And if they don't give that guidance, that means we have loose guidance. We have loosey-goosey constraints. There's a lot of conversations ongoing right now, so particularly around employee experience. We want to develop a brand around what the employee experience is internally. And I'm saying, show me the guidelines. We don't do brand, somebody else does brand. But if the guidelines are like, it should feel this, that means we have a lot of, leverage. We have a lot of leeway to go with. And then if they come back and they say, well, we didn't mean like that, I'll say, great, give me something I can use. Otherwise, I have to ship. I can use the same shipping, I have to send it out. Tell me something I can use. So those are a lot of those like non-constraint constraints. What I want to make sure is that we're not a team that is body shopping something for somebody else. Because if we get into that conversation, then we have 12 different people over the shoulder, right? What is the Mike Davidson video in Design Disruptors where he's like making it move pixels? We don't want to be that. We're not actually skilled in that department very good. Yeah.
Prior to you all had set up for usage guidelines. What did you were using a lot for a while, then it was something else. Like prior to
We put the website out, was the first thing we did. First thing. There was no Confluence page or PowerPoint. We did not tell anybody it was available until there was this marketing website. I sat in a closet with a bunch of paper so that it would deaden the noise to record a video, to make, record audio, to put a video on. The site isn't even run by a CMS. We said we don't need one. So it's, what is it using? The static HTML.
Static site generator.
Yeah, static site generator. Using the framework. We said that, well, this page uses the same framework that we made it on. And what ended up happening is these other systems that are out there, so for public facing, they all fund it through big projects, which means there's governance and committees, and there's one team that controls it, which is great. You need that for player facing. But it makes it slow, difficult to update. I can't really contribute back. But for internal, we don't have all that. We don't have those worries. So for us, it's largely like speed. We have a start now button, and with that, in 30 seconds, you can spit out a package that is just tailored for you. I think the downside is that there's parts of that we, because of project work, we don't get to maybe evangelize as much as we want to. And we hope to do that more. We actually have a team workshop tomorrow to sort of see what's working and what's not working. I may. to get that done, to sort of see from a priority of our team standpoint, what do we need to focus on around joystick and other things. Yeah.
So since this wasn't funded and a lot of times it was pretty informal, not being a project, how did you get people on board to contribute towards it? Was sort of just word of mouth, or did you?
Word of mouth. Word of mouth. The TLDR is like, we built it, you could use it if you want, you don't have to, you know, shrug. And so it wasn't like this aggressive campaign to go out and get users. Interestingly enough, my leadership loves saving time and not spending money. Right? So I save them money by not creating a project. It also came with timing. So when I joined EA, I joined in April. Our fiscal year begins in April, which means 6 months before all the projects for the fiscal were already decided. So I was here for a whole another 9 months before I could even pitch a project. We were already in that cycle. We had to work. We needed it. We built it so that other people could use it. Let's see what happens. We still use it, you know. Even if it's just for us, it's good. Yeah.
You seem like you identified a lot of forcing challenges that you have for kind of doing this guerrilla style.
Yeah.
What challenges that happened, or something like an impediment that happened that you didn't see coming, that you have to kind of find an all-around pathway to address?
I had hoped that once we put it out there, that we would have to do a lot less evangelization. I had hoped that instead of go talk to Ryan, that maybe it might have changed to everybody should use this. That hasn't really happened. So we still have to go out and do a lot of that pitch work. So that was something that came up. I had the advantage of having worked at the company previously too, so I came in with a few years of knowledge of knowing what had already been successful and what had not been successful. But yeah, I'd say that the biggest one of like doing it guerrilla style and not doing it as a project was they're kind of like, cool, so you never need it. You never need money.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
The other big thing we ran into.
That's Andy, by the way.
Sorry. At a company as large as EA, there are, again, obviously teams all doing their own thing, and we quickly realized we ran into other design systems that are already built or being built by teams that were also being secretive. And so that was something that initially, and the one we ran into at the very beginning was a design system that was built internally that was very closely tied to specific technologies that were being used, so it was very difficult for teams to just use it. But it was marketing focused. It was very external focused. So we quickly realized that wasn't something that we were really competing against. Like even though it was another design system, it's like, no, that's not what we don't want to be external. We're for the employees. We're for internal tools. And so that was one of the first big challenges we found. And since then, we've come across a couple of other teams.
What's interesting, I think, Tim, is that every day, or maybe not every day, but like once a month, I still have another team that says, we need a UI framework to go do our stuff. Right? And I just say, we have one. Here it is. And they don't use it. I think a lot of, culturally, if you don't own it, you feel a sense like it's not yours. But I also don't like offer to go make them one. So it's the long game, towing the line and just, yeah, there it is. Cool. So the requests haven't stopped of like, we really, you know. So I'm in IT and there's a sister organization. So we do the same things, but one is like internally focused, one's externally focused, like employee player kind of stuff. And they've been asking, we need a UI framework. But we're all part of the same company, organization. And so they've asked, every 6 months it kind of comes up again, and my response is the same. Hey, yeah, there it is. you know?
So I think my follow-up question would be, how important do you think design education, even at a fundamental level, is, you know, to the design system? Because the design system doesn't necessarily educate
No.
people using it.
No.
It just provides them framework.
So design education is incredibly important, but companies have to ship. And for better or for worse, when you are in large companies, ship ends up being probably priority number one. It's my job to go do the education side. External to this, a design director of FIFA and I have created an internal design network for those 44 designers all across EA. We've established a community of best practices in learning, and twice a year we gather and I lead 3-day workshops on design education. And we invite external speakers to come in, and they're not speaking to the designers, they're speaking to the analytics teams or the customer experience teams. And I do that as part of education. There are lots of students come in, visit Eric, visit the iSchool. I'm going to Georgia Tech in a couple weeks. There are high school students that come once a month, and we talk about this stuff. So, you know, that's baked in, but it's really difficult at large companies unless that CEO or that whoever believes that design education is a basic principle of what the company is about, that it's never going to be like a personal objective that I'm measured on and that I get promoted on. I have to care about it and go do that. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Anyone else? Cool. Thanks for coming out on Wednesday night.